Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Powering Progress Using Sprint Collaboration to Drive Electricity Systems Change in Alberta. I think we can all agree when I say that Alberta's electricity system is at a bit of a crossroads, with growing demand, evolving technologies, and shifting policies colliding in complex ways. So accelerating meaningful change is going to require some new ways of working together. And that is exactly what today's conversation is about. My name is Maureen Kola, and I'm thrilled to be moderating today's session on behalf of the Energy Futures Lab. Through Alberta's Electricity's Future Initiative, we bring together industry leaders, policymakers, communities, and innovators to co-create solutions to the most pressing challenges facing Alberta's grid. I'm joining today from Minikpa, also known as Banff, situated in Treaty 7 territory and the Rocky View Métis District. This area is the traditional lands of many First Nations and Métis people. And as someone who loves spending time on the land, hiking through remote mountain landscapes, I always find myself in awe of what surrounds me. And it's in these moments that I can really acknowledge and appreciate Indigenous peoples' enduring connection to the land. And as we move into fall, the land around me is shifting from those beautiful, multicolored alpine flowers to the golden larches and poplars. We are stepping into a season of transformation, gratitude, and preparation. And so I invite you to take a moment now just to reflect on what this new season might mean for you. Thank you. Okay, so before we dive in on today's discussion, there's just a couple housekeeping items to note. We are going to be recording today's session, and we will be posting a copy of the webinar on our YouTube page. For anybody who wasn't able to make it in person today or would like to rewatch it later, we'll be sharing this link with all participants in a follow-up email, and would love it if you could share it with people within your network that you think might be interested in what we're talking about today, or if you think people just might be curious to learn more about joining one of AEF's or Alberta's Electricity Futures future working groups. In addition, if the conversation today sparks some questions for you, please use the Q&A box to submit the questions throughout the session. We will be saving some time at the end of the session to answer these. Now, if you see a great question that you want answered, please be sure to upvote it so that it makes its way to the top of the list. So before I introduce the panelists, I just want to start by setting the stage a little bit. So phase 3 of our work builds on several years of collaboration through Alberta's Electricity Future Initiative. In this phase, we've really looked to convene a new governance structure and are piloting solutions through what we're calling, a sprint-based collaboration innovation. A sprint-based collaborative innovation. And what I mean by that is these are short, focused bursts of co-creation designed to accelerate systems change. So today, we'll be exploring how this sprint approach can help us break down silos between system actors. It can tackle complex challenges collaboratively, and hopefully build momentum towards a resilient, low-carbon electricity future in Alberta. I also want to highlight that we recently published recommendations for optimizing Alberta's electricity distribution system. These recommendations emerged directly from our collaborative work with the solutions teams that you will be hearing from today. The recommendations provide actionable pathways to the government and industry to ensure long-term electricity affordability by unlocking innovation, enabling distributed energy resources, and improving grid resilience. Okay, so with that said, let's dive in. So I'm really excited to have this group of panelists with us today, which includes Carrie and Leanne and Jesse, along with Phil. And maybe if we can just get to the next slide that shows them, thank you very much. So now instead of reading out all of their bios, I'm going to invite each of them to share their name, their organization, and most importantly, what excites you most about collaborating through sprints to tackle some of Alberta's electricity challenges. So Carrie, why don't we start with you? Oh, and you're just on mute, Carrie, if you can unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Wow, first mess up there. Sorry about that. My name is Carrie Hyde. I'm with the Pembina Institute. My role is as the manager of utility integration and demand side management. What I really appreciate about the EFL and sprint-based collaboration is it brings urgency and focus to market reform conversations that can take a long time to move into a solution space. So what it really does is push us to get concrete in just months. And what made it really powerful was the mix of people involved. We had industry experts alongside informed but outside voices, and that blend kept the work grounded, I think, in what matters, like customers, industry, the system itself, rather than reflecting just one organizational or one-dimensional perspective. And I think that's exactly what Alberta needs right now.
Awesome. Leanne.
Good afternoon, Leanne Kerr. I am with Altalink. I am a regulatory specialist, and I'm going to tell you my very favorite part of all of the sprints is when we established the four kind of grounding scenarios that we were going to, dig into, and everyone was told, go to whichever group pulls you. Everybody go to whichever group pulls you. And so that I know that the people that are joining the working group with me all have this kind of same, they're all on the same page and they're at least seeking to learn a little bit more. That was my favorite part of it.
Awesome. Sounds good. Jesse.
Hi, I'm Jesse Rowe. I'm the Executive Director of the Alberta Energy Efficiency Alliance. I led the Demand Side Management Working Group. And I think my favorite part of everything with the sprints and the activities that we did was really the breadth and diversity of people that we had participating. I think the Energy Futures Lab does a great job of bringing people together, and not just the normal people that the people that you've seen at these conversations over and over again, but increasing that diversity and going and actively seeking out new people that maybe their perspective hasn't been reflected in these conversations as much. And I think that's probably my favorite part about the whole experience.
Okay. And Phil, last but not least.
Yeah, hi everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Phil McKay. I'm a senior director at the Canadian Renewable Energy Association. I work primarily on distributed energy resources, or DERs or DERs, or all the different ways we're going to say that today, as well as grid integration of wind, solar, and energy storage at large. I'd say with working in the DER space, it's so huge and it touches on so many areas of society that it was honestly just so great to contribute to a collective, right? It wasn't just a one voice pushing into the fog there, but as was mentioned before, a lot of diversity of opinion. But I think one of my favorite things that got me most excited, which might not sound so exciting, is that there was somebody organizing this, that somebody was in charge. They weren't pushing a specific direction, but they were actually taking the reins.
Right. So that herding the cats kind of scenario. That's awesome. Okay. Well, thank you. Okay. So let's sort of dive into starting with like why, we really looked at taking sort of the sprint-based collaborations. And so we feel that sprints are a different way of working. It's been a title that's been used in a few different initiatives in Alberta. And essentially, they move quickly, they focus on tangible outcomes, and they really look to bring together, as you guys highlighted, some of those unusual collaborators. So why do you think this type of approach matters now for Alberta's electricity system? And Phil, since you went last time, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, it's Collaborative work can often drag on quite a while and drift in and out. I think, especially since time is of the essence here, I think we've got a lot of looming crises that we're trying to deal with and opportunities that might get missed. Uh, it's been really good to take this approach because it's intensive, but it's finite, right? You've got a time frame on it, so you know how long you're in it for. So as I'm volunteering my time into it, it's like, okay, I know there's an end to it. So fine, yeah, we'll buckle down and I'll spend a few extra hours in this sprint. Yeah, so I think that's why it's so critical. It's almost like a ratchet strap as well with these sprint based activities. You finish the sprint, you click it over. We're not going back, we're going forward.
Ah, nice. I like that. That's awesome. Carrie, what about you?
Yeah, I think Phil's really said most of it. I think what Alberta really needs right now is that understanding that the system is evolving quickly, and sprint-based collaboration gives us a way to stress test those ideas across different lenses and build solutions that have real legitimacy in a really quick way, but also in a very deeply collaborative way. I think that's what I like.
Okay, sounds good. So Jesse, same question, or if it's sort of similar in response to what the other two have, maybe build off like how is it maybe different compared to traditional working groups?
Yeah, I think the limited time that Phil was talking about is such a key factor, right? And with the complexity we're dealing with the electricity system, like how do you make progress on something that's so complex when you've got limited time? And I think the piece that the sprints allows us to do that maybe traditional processes don't have is sometimes you get to the end of the sprint and you say, oh, wait a minute, that's not exactly going the way we thought. Maybe we should actually pivot. Maybe we should throw something out and do something different. And so that stage-based approach allows you to say, okay, that's not really where we want to focus in the next sprint. Maybe we want to change direction. So I really appreciate that as being something that's different than what you do with a traditional process.
Okay. And Leanne, any final comments on this from you?
I actually don't think I have anything to add. They all three perfectly covered it all off.
Perfect. All right. Well, then let's switch and let's actually give folks on the call some insight into what the four of you and the teams that you were working with really looked to develop over the last, what was like about 8 months. So if I can just get the slides brought up, I will start with you, Leanne, and just really if you can look to describe the challenge you and your fellow solution team members were responding to, the proposed solution, and then sort of the product that you look to develop.
There was the challenge statement that says, utilities are not very much incented to optimize the grid, right? Like there's this kind of mentality where we want to want to earn a return on our investment of the assets that we put in the ground. But is there a way that we can optimize using the assets that are already existing and then maybe perhaps offering some what is it the wires solutions, so or non-wire solutions. So came up with this concept of perhaps having a planning agency that planned for transmission and distribution kind of planning events. So but like I said, the distribution and utilities are more often incented to put assets in the ground. If there was a planning agency, an integrated planning agency, what would that look like for Alberta? That's about it.
Okay, and so where did you guys get to in the end?
We got to at the end that this concept of a central planning kind of agency was probably a little bit premature. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the world, today with distribution planning provisions in the legislation. The ISO has this, optimized planning, transmission planning scheme going on. There's all sorts of things that seem to be overlapping at the same time. So where we kind of said, it's a good idea, but maybe we should take a step back and see where all of this other stuff is headed before we pursue.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks for that. Jesse, over to you.
So on the demand side management group, I put the challenge about as high level in general as you can get here, but this is what we're all really working towards is improving the affordability, reliability, and sustainability of the electricity system. And the reason that we focused on demand side management is because it's a mechanism that's been used successfully in other jurisdictions and it does all three. And we're not doing as much in Alberta as other jurisdictions. And so we thought, you know what, we need to spend some time looking at this in more detail and how can we be doing more demand side management. So when we come to the solution box there, we try to define demand side management very generally, very high level as well, very broadly, I think is a better word to use, because it can mean different things to different people. But when we were defining it and looking at other jurisdictions, that was getting to the product, we wanted to do a research summary of what are other jurisdictions doing when it comes to engaging consumers to influence how and when they use their electricity. And so again, we took a very broad approach to that. So we were looking at what do they do with demand response and energy efficiency programs? What are they doing when it comes to direct participation in ancillary services and wholesale markets? And what are they doing with respect to time varying rates? And those three bullet points there, I mean, that is broader than most definitions of DSM. But when I've been in these conversations over the number of years that we've been working on it, those are the types of things that people bring up. They say, well, what about this? You're talking about these demand response and energy efficiency programs. Well, what about time varying rates? What about the ancillary services market? What about the wholesale market? How does it all fit together? And so we wanted to make sure the research was very broad and looking at all those aspects. So we are looking to summarize that research and make it publicly available. It's not quite available yet, but it looks at 6 different jurisdictions. So it had Texas, California, New York, Ontario, UK, and Australia. And one of the main findings out of that is that they're all doing something in each of those 3 categories. They've all got some form of demand response and energy efficiency programs. They all have direct participation in the markets. They all have time varying rates, some of them mandatory, some of them voluntary. And then we did a comparison to Alberta. What is Alberta doing? Well, we do have direct participation in ancillary service and wholesale markets, but not to the same degree as some of those other jurisdictions. Time varying rates, again, not to the same degree as other jurisdictions. Demand response and energy efficiency programs, again, we're not doing as much in those spaces as those other jurisdictions. And so coming out of the research summary, our final product, which is up there on the slide, is we wanted to put together a briefing note to say to government, directed towards government, to say, here's what we found in the research, and here's some ideas on how we could be doing more when it comes to demand side management in order to meet those goals of affordability, reliability, and sustainability for the system.
Awesome. Thanks, Jesse. Phil, how about I pass it over to you?
Great. Let's talk about DERS. Yeah, as Jesse's just talking there, I think, yeah, everything was connected. And I think we'll talk about that later a bit more about how there was overlap in some of these topics. So what we focused on was kind of the pace and scale of growth. And actually, just before we got on the webinar here is talking about a trip to Whitehorse I got to take just this past weekend. Northern Lights were amazing, but they're hitting a wall on how much they can integrate already because of a smaller system. And so we're anticipating actually already seeing some of these limitations in Alberta as to what can be integrated. So with this fast deployment of DERs, there's a need to address the challenges being raised around reliability and affordability, as mentioned earlier. And where we started was with collecting that background info. This is a complex space, so many rules and regs that needed to be understood. So we didn't just throw more information into the noise of what's already been done, but actually take a look at the context and move forward. Had a whole bunch of ideas, but ended up shortlisting a manageable short-term set of actions. And that was important to the group as well, that this was for the here and now and not for maybe a 2050 net zero future. So we talked just briefly here, I'll say, mentioned the planning piece of it, planning for DER integration, that financial incentive or mechanisms for utilities to invest in non-wireless alternatives, demand side solutions and DERs. And then also just acknowledging the consumer in all of this, that they want it, right? This is a choice, and we're moving into this prosumer world. So how do we accommodate for everybody to generate as well as consume? And we ended up, you can see there in the product, this draft DER white paper, which fed into some of the policy actions that were put forward already. This had all that background in it, all those suggestions aggregated from these diverse viewpoints. And I think it was a really worthwhile exercise.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. And Carrie, over to you.
Yeah, so I think the challenge our group took on was Alberta has a growing number of these distributed energy resources that Phil's talking about, from rooftop solar to electric vehicles. But our centralized market isn't really designed to let them provide local grid services. So that means we're missing out on flexibility, customer participation, and the cost-effective non-wire solutions that can address some of these reliability issues. Our solution was the local grid market mechanism, or LGMM, because we all like acronyms in this industry, which is really a distribution level market design that enables DERs and DSM to be aggregated and provide services like flexibility, voltage support, peak demand management, those sorts of supports. And the product we created was the local grid market mechanism policy framework. And it's really a document that defines the problem, sets out the LGMM solution, and draws on global best practices and adapts lessons to Alberta's unique market and regulatory context. So for me, the value there is that it gives us a credible Alberta-made starting point to shape how customers, communities, and utilities can work together to deliver this affordable, reliable local grid services that can maybe improve costs for those who wish to participate, and also those who are just participating on the grid as users.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that, everybody. So within the round one working groups, I think I'm hoping folks are getting a sense that, we deliberately took a portfolio approach that would allow us to experiment with solutions at different innovation scales. And so by that, I mean solutions that, like DSM, could be implemented now, but maybe something like the local market mechanism that might be more transformative and might need more time before it gets implemented. We also wanted to really create that space for failure. And this is a word we don't love to throw out there, but we felt is a really needed word when you are trying to do something different. And so when we think of failure, this is really meaning that we are open to taking risks and developing solutions that are not guaranteed to move forward, but that will really allow us to take learnings from all of the solutions under development and still having that flexibility to wrap up a solution early if we get signals from the system that it's either not ready for it or it's not the right time, or that there's just other high priority places that we could direct our time and effort into. And so with that, Jesse, as you've alluded to, your solution and what your team worked on was really sort of the most defined scope, along with sort of what I would say the most well understood context. As you said, DSM is not new. It is broadly deployed in other jurisdictions. So could you speak to how was the final product impacted positively and or negatively by collaborating with this wider group from across the system that came from that wider diversity of expertise and experience?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, or my perspective, we have kind of two different groups we were working with. One was our working group where we would meet, every so often, and we'd have direct conversations about our topic, and people would ask questions and say, "What about this? What about that?" And we would go off and do some more research to answer those questions. And that process actually went very well. We had lots of time to interact and go back and forth when it came to the different questions that were being raised and the information that we were bringing forward. So I think at the end of the day, we got to a product where everybody could look at it and say, yeah, that makes sense. That's answered all my questions, and I'm supportive of the way it's being positioned going forward. I think the challenge that we have is you saw from the other presentations that our working groups, we were dealing with some similar topics, but we weren't having that level of interaction between the groups. And so we would all, as individual working groups, do our work, and then we would come together, everybody together, and we say, oh, wait a minute, yours overlaps a lot with mine, yours is interacting a lot with mine, but we didn't spend as much time, I think, having those conversations about how does this all fit together. And so, yeah, like I said, there's kind of two different groups that I think of. One is one that we spent a lot of time with, and there was a lot of cohesion at the end. Another one we didn't spend as much time with, going cross groups, cross working groups. And I think we still have some work to do when it comes to that cohesion of how do all these things fit together.
So a great sort of observation and sort of something we could look to bring into round two of the working groups. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. So then, Carrie, hopefully folks are getting the sense that, this local market mechanism is really maybe on the opposite end of the spectrum compared to the DSM work. This was highly conceptual subject when we started with it, and it took lots of research and discussion to really look to frame the solution in such a way that we could move it forward meaningfully. Um, and I would say this is partly why this solution will be continuing on in round two. And so, with all of that in mind, could you talk maybe about how you honed in on the concept that you guys landed on? What was maybe most helpful, and what you learned about trying to advance sort of a more conceptual idea in a more concrete way?
Yeah, so the LGMM was described as conceptual, and it is, especially in the Alberta context. But this isn't really a blue sky idea. It's already being done elsewhere, as Jesse alluded to earlier. So we really grounded that work with the jurisdictional scan first and foremost of places like New York, the UK, Australia, Texas, and Maine, where local markets and non-wires approaches are creating value. We also reviewed Alberta-based pilots. So we know a lot of utilities and market actors are very interested in things like virtual power plants and managed EV charging programs. So we kind of did a comprehensive assessment of what was being tested already at the distribution level. And then we had exploratory conversations with Alberta utilities, focused on operational planning and how non-wires solutions could fit into their processes, what data, what telemetry and interconnection changes might be needed, and how they could foresee integrating DER services, if at all, into distribution operations. And so while it started out conceptual, what we built is a framework that ties global experience and Alberta pilots to the province's regulatory and market structure. That blend of external evidence, I'd say, plus local operational perspectives gave the idea better traction. And so my big lesson in that is when you're trying to advance a contextual and conceptual idea, you need structure and narrative. You need enough real world examples to show it's credible and clear framing so stakeholders can see how it fits Alberta systems. And the sprint helped us do both, providing like discipline and diverse voices to stress test the framing. And to your point, that's why the solution is moving into round two. We now have an Alberta grounded framework that's ready to move into pilots or policy conversations or to test with utilities and other market actors to see if it actually has merit.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Carrie. So, Leanne, as you talked about previously, the integrated planning solution that you were leading ended up not moving forward. I think really because we got those indicators from working group members that it wasn't needed or that it wasn't the right time, as you said, because of a bunch of different things that were happening within the system. Okay, so in the end, we ended up wrapping up this solution, and I'm going to use the term again. This is a fail fast and well example from our perspective. And so, based on your experience, what were some of the indicators for you that this solution was a no go? And then, how could we maybe take that more broadly as we move into round two? Are there things that you would suggest that we should keep our eyes open for to ensure that we could continue to fail well as needed in future rounds? Oh, you're on mute, Leanne.
Okay, did that work?
Yeah.
I think there's so I found myself a lot of the time engaging in these conversations where I am saying, oh, I didn't know that. like all of these leaders and these collaborators are all giving me information, and you're trying to take it all in, and you're kind of going. I think the more that you say, "I didn't know that," maybe that means the solution is probably, but well, maybe not perfect, but it's probably kind of not perfect for everyone. So I think that was my takeaway, and that might even be my future, like uh, I'm always following people around the hallways and asking questions and like trying to get all my information straight. But there was a lot of information that I wasn't aware of what they're actually, distribution planners are doing today. Like there's lots of stuff they're doing today. We don't need a complete overhaul of everything. So and maybe fail, but learned tons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like learned tons in the process, which I'm always happy to do.
Yeah. And so beyond yourself as well, do you feel like those learnings were shared amongst sort of the different working group members? And so, like you said, for yourself, there was some like, I don't know moments, but was that sort of shared amongst the group, do you feel like?
I think 100%. Like, and I was saying earlier, so the people that wanted to delve in were the ones that came and joined the working group, but there was all sorts of people going, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. So, but having all of those big brains, right, in the same room and talking together and enlightening everyone, like that was my favorite part.
Right. Okay. Awesome. All right. So, Phil, over to you. You were one of our few folks, working group members, who was not and still currently isn't based in Alberta. So, based on your experience working, as you said, with DERS in Ontario, what do you see as some of the pros and cons of applying your expertise from a different jurisdiction into a very Alberta focused initiative?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for letting me in, even though, and I do want some kudos as I'm calling in from Calgary today. Um, it's been said, I think, just about by everybody at this point, this isn't brand new stuff. And so, as Carrie mentioned, went out to do a jurisdictional scan first, right? Who's doing what, where, when, why, how, and then bring that intel back as great examples. And what I've seen in my work with utilities and system operators is it works to get some pilot projects from other jurisdictions as kind of baseline data, like, okay, it's possible. And within this market structure, it's feasible. Um, but until it comes home and they get that data themselves coming in from their wires and poles and they get that comfort level, they're not just going to flip the switch and go full scale deployment. And so, what this does as we bring things in from outside the borders, now we are inside the borders, and these projects, processes, the scale up happens within Alberta. It can be exported to the provinces and territories as homegrown. It's a little bit closer to home, right? So I think that was really key, and it's going to be really helpful for me going forward. Um, Also, I think that what AEF was doing is also building capacity within Canada to do this kind of work. So maybe this is a bit nuanced or meta, if you like, but um, this kind of transition work, this kind of collaborative innovation is not common everywhere.
Mhm.
And so having more people like myself who were invited in to something outside of my jurisdiction, I can then take that to other engagements that I'm a part of and say, hey,
Mm.
have you thought about sprint-based kind of collaboration? And maybe start pockets growing around the country. I mean, there was a con to it, right? Not being able to be there in person. There was especially one get together that I really wanted to be at, and a lot of stuff happened, and I had a bit of FOMO, but it just didn't work out, and so that was, yeah, kind of the drawback. But hey, we're in a digital world.
We are, absolutely. Okay, thank you for that. That's really great. So, if we shift focus a little bit and really think about translating this work. So it's one thing to come to a session within the Energy Futures Lab space, but it's really about now trying to translate this back into your own organizations, or even more importantly within the broader system. And so I think we can agree that sort of throughout round one, there were lots of lessons learned and value produced by the working groups, which you all have highlighted a little bit today. So, reflecting on that, what are one or two concrete things that each of you are doing now to leverage the work or the learnings to really help to evolve the system towards that modernized and sustainable future that we're really looking to seek? And Carrie, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, since the sprint wrapped up, I've really focused on broadening the audience for this type of work and showing it's not just theoretical. I've been looking a lot into Ontario's approach, how policy and regulatory updates and roadmaps are enabling local distribution companies to integrate flexibility and drawing those lessons that Alberta can use. I participate in integrated resource planning technical advisory committees with other utilities across Canada to understand how and if they're looking at distributed energy resource participation in their markets. And that gives me a broader perspective across Canada, to Phil's point again, and helps identify what elements might be transferable. I do write articles and op-eds on why community and customer level aggregation matters, why it's important for equity, how it helps in democratizing the system to enable more people to be involved and understand their energy use and behaviors, and really build that understanding of what enabling DER integration into the utility system could look like here. So given my day job at the Pembina Institute, I really see our role as the Pembina Institute. We build capability and capacity in the energy transition to policymakers, utilities, and communities. I see that this framework deserves a place in Alberta's electricity conversation. And the next step will be translation, taking that framework and making it accessible. So when pilots and policy windows open, there's already awareness and support to maybe start moving some of these ideas forward.
Okay, that's awesome. Phil, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, my day job. I'm working actively on DER policy for Canada and trying to get our perspective from the Renewables Association into the mix in a whole bunch of different jurisdictions. Specifically on my end for behind the meter or behind the fence solar and energy storage. So the ability to workshop ideas was really helpful for me because often it can happen within your group of trusted partners that you can, does this make sense? Does this work? Is this going to hit a barrier here or there? And we are able to take that to a more diverse group and say, hey, does this check out? I remember pitching an idea at one point. I'm like, no, that's not going to work, Phil. And like, oh, why? Tell me, right? Because it's so useful anyway. So
Yeah.
that was great. Um, I will say, I think with this kind of work going forward, and I mentioned at the front end, the leadership, that taking ownership is so key. And so that I think is something we'll have to really, I'm trying to think through in my work going forward. How do you get that work led well and resourced well? Because those leaders need to get paid at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And so are there funding opportunities that maybe we've seen come and go that could be better directed into a collaborative approach rather than a singular project or something like that?
Got it. Okay. Leanne, what about from your perspective? Oh, you're on mute.
Gosh, sorry. I think I learned a ton of information when we were doing our jurisdictional kind of review, and we heard it often. Alberta's like nowhere else.
Mhm.
It's like nowhere else. So how can how do we model something that's like nowhere else? And so you really are starting from scratch, right? Like you really are saying this could work here, except we need to do this and this and this and this and this and this. And then there's a little bit of frustration, but we have to live with the model that is out there today. But so what can we do to, structure our businesses so that the model is a little bit more flexible? You know what I mean? A little bit more less stringent than this is how you make money utilities. This is how you make money, it's a little bit of a different beast, right? Like there's ERCOT. Germany had the nice integrated planning model, but there's so many differences between Alberta and the rest of the world that it's difficult to come up with something that's going to resolve for everybody.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So it's really about being able to sort of take those examples, but then reshifting or adjusting components of it, if I could say, into what might be possible in an Alberta context as opposed to a direct translation.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Interesting. Okay. Jesse, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, so at the Alliance, we've been working on demand side management for a number of years now. We're focusing in right now on demand response on the electricity system side of it. One of the reasons for that is because we see quite a bit of interest when it comes to folks like the AUC, ISO government. They've all talked about demand response as something that they'd like to look into and do more of. And so one of the things that we're doing is bringing together our members and other stakeholders that we know are active on demand response, not just in Alberta, but outside of it. We brought them together for a webinar last week. If you missed the webinar, you can always go to our website, aeea.ca/DSM, or just go to our website and you'll be able to view the recording of the webinar. So it was a great great set of panelists like this today, but focused in very much on that topic of demand response. And when we're working on demand response, I just want to make sure everyone's clear. It is about reducing load during emergency events or during peak times, but it's also about the opportunities to do things like use behind the meter batteries and export power during that time. Be recognized for the fact that you're exporting that power at a particularly important time. And so I think it's encompassing a lot of the DER conversation we've heard today as well. But I use the term demand response because that's maybe it's an old school term at this point, but it's one that we do hear others in the space using. So we focused in on that. The other piece that we're working on, which I wanted to let people know about, is we're in the process of putting together a demonstration around the demand response program. So we're working with several distribution utilities in the province. We don't have a lot of details on it public yet, but if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll be able to see as soon as we're ready to talk about that more publicly, the demonstration that we're going to be undertaking. And again, we want to approach the concept of demand response very broadly, inclusive of things like smart charging, smart thermostats, commercial and industrial, behind the meter batteries. All of the above is kind of my approach to these things. So just a couple of things we're working on right now.
Jesse, I feel so tempted to try to push you to at least, give our audience here today just a little tiny insight to reward them for coming in terms of what you could possibly share on that demand or DSM pilot. But no, not even like a little inkling.
Well, I already went into some of the stuff I can share, but we do have an RFP on our website if anybody wants some of the more details. What the actual
Okay.
project looks like, of course, as you go through an RFP process, what the RFP says and what the actual contract says may be a little bit different, but you can get a little more detail based on that RFP on our website.
Okay, good enough. Thank you, Jesse. We look forward to that coming out. I'm really excited to see that happening in the province. So we are going to shift. We've got about 18 minutes left or so, and so we would like to open it up for any questions from those folks participating today. And so I see that we've got some of them, and so I'm going to open these up to any of the panelists that might like to respond. So why don't we start with the first one here, really related to REM design or the restructured energy market that's being led by our Alberta Electric System Operator, or ISO, and it was published in the summer of 2025. And so this particular person is wondering, how the working group recommendations might impact REM, or are they recommendations for further refinement? And so maybe I'd open it up to anybody who maybe participated in REM, and I'll maybe just sort of set the stage by saying that, like, on a whole, AEF, because we were focused more on the demand side, we deliberately chose not to be highly involved in REM, but knowing that some of our members were participating and could sort of bring some of that information forward so that it could at least be considered as we were talking through some of that local market mechanism. So anybody else like to respond to this question?
I did spend a bit of time engaging in REM, but I didn't spend a lot. And the reason is because when we work on DSM, again, to show the research on what other jurisdictions are doing, like participation in wholesale markets is just one of the many things that happens in other jurisdictions. I think on my slide, there were probably 5 other things that jurisdictions enable their consumers to, be rewarded for being flexible loads, for example. And participation in the wholesale market is just one of them. And so we haven't prioritized that because that conversation, generally speaking, in this province is really around large generators and how are they participating in the marketplace. So we're spending our time maybe focused on some other things. But the one piece of REM that I was particularly interested in is when they were talking about getting to shorter settlement for all consumers, because getting to shorter settlement for all consumers, obviously, when you have monthly cumulative meters for residential and small commercial right now, like there is no price signal, there is no benefit to being a flexible load if you're, measured monthly and billed monthly. No one can tell when you're being a flexible load, so they can't value it. And so I'm certainly interested in when we can get to shorter settlements. The ISO and the government said 2040 is kind of when we want to be getting there by at the very least. And that's a long time out. And so we look at those other mechanisms like, the demand response programs. Like the demonstration we're going to be doing, like in less than 12 months, we're going to have a program in market that's going to be able to value the demand flexibility of those small customers. And we're going to use a model that's been used in other jurisdictions, bring your own device, using device telemetry data from a smart thermostat or another smart device to be able to then see that shift and reward it and value it because it is bringing value to the distribution system, the transmission system, and the wholesale market as well. And so that's where I look at REM and I say, well, that's interesting, but we're actually more interested in some other things these days.
Okay, awesome. Carrie, there was a question directed to you specifically around talking about the local grid market mechanism.
Mhm.
Is it related again to REM's security constrained economic dispatch local
Yeah.
market power?
So the SCED, or I think that's what they call it, they're not directly related because again they operate at different levels of the electricity system. So the scope for the REM SCED is bulk system ISO run, and it's about ensuring dispatch of generation and storage resources across the province in a least cost way, subject to any transmission constraints. Whereas and also local market power mitigation, when constraints bind large generators in constrained areas could exercise market power. So REM includes these mitigation measures, which ensures fair and reliable operation of the wholesale side of the market. Again, the LGMM is a local level distribution system utility run. So it creates that local market at the distribution level to dispatch and compensate demand side management, distributed energy resources, and storage for local grid services. So that voltage support, peak reduction on like feeder level, substation level, below that ISO market level. And so it's designed to address those distribution constraints, not bulk system ones. The only thing I see in terms of like, there should be an understanding of how that integration between the two different markets is going to work and how they're going to work together. I see that very specifically and probably very differently than anyone else on this, so I might not go into it right now. But that's the difference. It's value streams on the distribution side rather than just on the wholesale bulk system.
Right. And to your point about like that interaction, that really hasn't been yet discussed within the working groups, and yet we could see that probably coming out potentially as part of round two as they dive into further description of what exactly this mechanism could look like. Would that be a fair assessment?
I certainly hope so.
Fingers crossed. Me too. Okay. So then, and a third question here from somebody on the line was, does part of this discussion, and by that I mean sort of the working groups, the round one, remove limits from household generation? And so they talk about this would be connected to microgen regulations, I'm assuming, around it being tied to like your specific annual consumption, and so forth. Um, Anybody want to take that one on? I'm not sure if it came up in any working groups. I'd say it was not a specific focus overall of AEF, but I don't know, Phil, within the DERS, if it came up at all.
It did. Yeah, we
Okay.
talked about it. And uh, a lot of the discussion revolved around customer choice, right? The grid is for the customers. Therefore, if they have a choice, if these technologies are hitting the market, can they not then move on that to whatever investment level they're interested? So I think you can think about this in a few different ways, but one way to think about it is like, what's the end game? The situation of this DER utopia a DURU maybe, I don't know, where everybody has choice. You can connect as much as you want, and it's economically feasible for you to do so. And everybody has choice. And we focus our incentive programs on maybe low-income housing or renters or those who need it most, the incentives the most. Um, it's a big leap to get there with like social, technical, regulatory, and market barriers along the way. And that's why we came back to those. What can we do right now? And so we started to talk about some of the advanced metering options that might be available, some of the more nuanced ways to allow more power onto the grid now rather than having to build more wires and poles. All of those kinds of things. That's why we landed where we did, was because of this kind of idea. Like, how do we remove the limits because people want it?
Right. Okay. Sounds good. So before I pick on some of the other questions that were in there, I have a question I'd like to ask you guys if you don't mind. So the AEF team released the distribution policy recommendations to Minister Newdorf and Deputy Minister James in May. We anticipate that the ministry will be using this document as one of their foundational pieces in their distribution policy engagements expected to launch this fall. Fingers crossed. We also understand that this engagement may take up to a year to complete. So given the round one solutions that we've talked about today, so given these solutions and the system capacity requirements or ideas that we outlined within the AEF distribution policy, tied into this sort of 1 year time frame that we have, what do you think needs to happen first? Or maybe put another way, is there a needed sequence in which solutions and or some of those distribution policy capabilities need to move forward?
I can start, and then I'm sure Jesse, Phil, and Leanne will all have something to say here. From my perspective, it's really policy. Policy has to happen first. Enabling policies have to happen that enable demand side management, DER integration, and all these things to be, in effect, useful on the distribution level. And that has to happen first and foremost. Secondly is regulatory reform. So today, distribution utilities are actually incentivized for energy throughput, which means through a price cap, they're basically provided revenues to encourage more supply on the system, more delivery of electricity through the system. That is a direct disincentive to anything that we're talking about today, which is about reducing and shifting and shaping load differently. So those disincentives would have to be removed. So modernizing the performance-based regulation framework that utilities are under, I'd say would be a massive next step. And then beyond that, in order to enable, we are 3-4 years out from some of the distribution utilities having AMI metering access. True AMI 2.0, to Phil's point, that even 5-minute level of real-time SCADA and telemetry is not, it's not enabled today. So if we're 4 to 5 years out from now, I would suggest we might want to improve or move up those technology needs timeframes for things like DERMS, so distributed energy resource management systems, SCADA and telemetry, AMI, and all the other bells and whistles that go with that for data transparency and protocols.
Okay. Does anybody else want to add anything to that?
Well, I would like to echo what Carrie said in terms of where do we start. I do think things that do need to start with government. That's what we identified in our research is the biggest difference between Alberta and other jurisdictions on demand side management, which what we focused on is they do have government direction. They do have governments writing regulations that'll enable a lot of these things that we're not currently doing here in Alberta. So that starting point is absolutely important. The point I want to add on to that is that when we look at things like the AUC engagement around time varying rates, we saw there was distribution utilities, providing responses to their report. And they were basically saying, these things don't happen overnight. Carrie mentioned the amount of time to just get the AMI deployment. Well, they're not talking just about the meters, but they're talking about all of the data management systems, the billing systems that has to be upgraded at the distributor as well as at the retailer. Distributors, they've got a life cycle with their current systems. If they were to replace them sooner than they were planning to, that's an additional cost. And so do you do that, or do you wait for the end of that life of that system and replace it at that point in time? If you accelerate it, who pays for it? Lots of great questions. I mean, they're talking about getting to shorter settlement, which is really a requirement for all consumers to be then, instead of being monthly cumulative for the small ones, being doing at 5 minute intervals. That's by 2040. And so they've already said, it might take a very long time to get all these systems in place. And so when it comes to sequencing, we have to think about all that. And it's not an easy conversation. It's going to take a while, but we do need to get started on having that conversation to figure out how long is it going to take to get all of these systems upgraded to get to that ultimate end goal. And also ask ourselves the question, what can we do in the short term and not wait till 2040 to do all of these things? What can be enabled with current infrastructure? Where can we start? Where can we go to next? Where can we maybe go to at the end of it when, maybe we're talking about 2040? So sequencing is a really important conversation to be having in this province.
Okay, and so not trying to get everything lined up perfectly before starting, but just start, get some data, get some information that can really then maybe support some longer term, frameworks or deployments and planning and such. Okay, awesome. I will look to take one more question here from the audience. And Leanne, this one is directed to you. And it talked about, the optimal transmission planning and existing regs. This person agrees that, do not necessarily support an integrated system planning. They wanted to know whether or not you would agree that the need for policy advocacy to enable an integrated system planning might be needed. And this will make the current optimal transmission planning, or OTP, more robust and include distribution planning. So I guess, what's the need for advocacy at this point related to this topic?
And so I think that's what this sprint was like. Should we go down this road of advocating for some sort of policy change? And I think where we got to, well, no, where we got to was the timing is not right for right now. But that doesn't mean it won't ever happen in the future. It's just like we're going to see how all of these other, initiatives play out. Like there's a whole distribution planning initiative, and there's new provisions in the regulations that talk about distribution planning. And there's the ISO's OTP initiative. There's all these other things kind of going on in the background that might be able to guide us to what direction we're heading for. But right now we are kind of like, we're not quite sure. We're not quite sure.
So this might be something that, depending on what comes out of these engagements, could be revisited at the future to determine whether or not it might be needed.
I will totally do that if you guys want me to do that.
All right, thanks, Leanne. So we've just got a couple minutes left here, and so thank you all for participating. And I just want to leave folks with a few thoughts. So when we talk about complex energy transition, the challenges we are facing really require new ways of solutioning. And this is a space in which EFL really thrives. Alberta's electricity future depends on collaboration because, let's face it, no one single actor can solve, this challenge or what we need to happen alone. I'd say that through Alberta's electricity future, we are demonstrating that sprint-based innovation, along with EFL's convening and facilitation approach, is really proving to be a powerful tool for co-creating solutions. And I think we can say that, the distribution policy recommendations really demonstrate that these solutions can provide the government with sort of a foundational piece that they can use within their own engagements as they look to develop, fingers crossed, new distribution policy. And so for those calling in and participating today, I would really encourage you to review those recently published recommendations on optimizing Alberta's distribution system and see them as an open invitation for industry, policy makers, and communities to really align and advocacy for these capabilities that the system really needs to support an affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy future for Alberta. So just so you guys know where we are going next week, we will be launching our round 2 working groups. And we will be focusing on advancing the local market mechanism that Carrie talked about today, as well as a new topic related to really determining the role of the electricity system in reducing energy poverty. We also anticipate launching a third working group in Q1 of 2026 that will focus on advancing the distribution policy recommendations. And in particular, we're going to start with that, looking to advance capability one, which is around integrating non-wire solutions into distribution policy to support optimization of utility assets. So today's conversation has really highlighted that change is not only necessary, but I think as these four have demonstrated, it's already happening. So our challenge now is really to scale that work, deepen collaboration, and build an electricity system that's resilient, innovative, and future ready. So if this webinar has intrigued you at all, feel free to visit our website for further information or to reach out directly via email for any questions that you might have. So on behalf of the Energy Futures Lab, thank you to Leanne, Carrie, Jesse, and Phil, and also for all of you for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.